All right, let's talk about something that affects pretty much every single one of us, your paycheck. Today, we're going to demystify a huge change in India called the Code on Wages 2019. It's a single law that totally overhauls how wages, bonuses, and even pay equality are managed. So, you might be asking, why was this even necessary? Well, it all started with a problem. Until recently, your pay was governed by this confusing patchwork of 4 different laws. I mean, some of them dated all the way back to the 1930s. You had one law for how you get paid, another for minimum wage, a third for bonuses. You get the idea. It was complicated for employees and, honestly, a real headache for employers to keep straight. So, to fix all that, the Indian Parliament brought in a single, comprehensive solution. The best way to think about it is like a universal remote for everything that has to do with your pay. The whole point was to simplify the rules and make everything clearer and more consistent for everybody. And this really just says it all, doesn't it? It takes that tangled mess of 4 different acts and boils them all down to just one. It's all about simplification, and the result is a system that's just a lot easier for everyone to understand. Okay, so let's get into it. Here's what we're going to break down. We'll start with what the law now considers a wage. Then we'll get into the rules for fair pay, the details of payday and deductions, how bonuses work, and finally, how all of your rights are actually protected and enforced. So, first things first, we have to start with the absolute foundation of your paycheck. We need to tackle the most fundamental question here. What legally counts as your wage? And this new definition is super important because everything else is calculated based on it. Under the code, your wages are made up of 3 core parts. This is the guaranteed chunk of your pay. You have your basic pay, the dearness allowance, which is basically an adjustment for the cost of living, and any retaining allowance. Just think of these as the fundamental, predictable building blocks of your salary. Now, just as important is what doesn't count in this core definition. The law is very specific about excluding a whole list of other payments. So things like your house rent allowance, travel money, overtime pay, and what your employer puts into your pension or gratuity. All of that is kept separate from that main wage calculation. But here's where it gets really clever. To stop companies from just loading up salaries with a ton of allowances to keep that core wage figure low, the code has this really important rule. If all those excluded payments we just talked about add up to more than 50% of your total pay, well, that extra amount gets automatically added back into your wages. It's a pretty powerful way to make sure everyone's got a fair and substantial base salary. Okay, now that we know what wages are, let's see how the code actually builds a system for fair pay. This part is all about making sure there's a baseline for everybody, and it covers both minimum pay and gender equality. The code creates this really strong 2-level system of protection. So on one level, you've got the minimum wage. That's set by governments, and it can be different depending on your skills, job, or where you live. But the code also adds something new, a national floor wage. This is set only by the central government, and it's like a hard safety net. No state can set its minimum wage any lower than this national floor. And this right here, this is a really big deal. The code is crystal clear on this point. It makes it totally illegal to discriminate based on gender when it comes to pay for the same work or work of a similar nature. This isn't just some nice-to-have guideline. It's a legal command for equal pay for all genders. And to make sure that this equality happens the right way, the law adds another layer of protection. An employer can't just lower one person's salary to match someone else's to be in compliance. No, leveling down. Parity has to be achieved by bringing wages up, not by cutting them. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of payday. This next section covers the practical rules for when you get paid and what an employer is legally allowed to take out of your check. The code really clears things up by setting these strict, legally binding deadlines. If you're paid daily, you get your money at the end of the shift. Weekly, by the last working day of that week. And if you're on a monthly cycle, your wages have to be in your account before the 7th day of the next month. These aren't just company policies anymore. This is the law. The code also makes the final payment process super quick. If you're leaving a company, doesn't matter if you resign or get dismissed, your employer now has to pay you all your final wages within just 2 working days. No more waiting around for weeks to get your final settlement.
To protect your take-home pay, the code puts a hard limit on what can be taken out. Sure, some deductions for things like housing or advances are okay, but the total amount that gets deducted in any pay period can't be more than 50% of your wages. This guarantees you'll always walk away with at least half of the wages you earned.
All right, let's talk about another key part of compensation that, let's be honest, we all look forward to: the annual bonus. The code also tidies up and clarifies the rules for this.
So here's a crucial point: a guaranteed minimum bonus. Every eligible employee is now entitled to an annual bonus of at least 8.33% of their wages. And get this, it's not tied to how well the company did. It's a guaranteed payment, even if the company didn't have any surplus profits that year.
And just like there's a minimum, there's also a maximum. The most an employer can pay out as a bonus in any year, which is linked to profits, is capped at 20% of your wages. So together, these two rules create a very clear and predictable range for bonuses.
So finally, a law is only as good as its enforcement, right? So how does the code make sure these rules are actually followed? And what can you do if they're not? The code brings in this new kind of official called an inspector cum facilitator. And that name tells you a lot about the change in approach. Their job isn't just to inspect and hand out penalties. It's also to advise and, well, facilitate compliance, to help both sides understand and follow the law.
And this, wow, this is a complete game changer for employees. As Section 59 says, if there's ever a dispute about unpaid wages or bonuses, the burden of proof is on the employer. They have to prove that they paid you correctly. You don't have to prove that you weren't paid. That's huge.
So there you have it, a quick tour of the Code on Wages 2019. From a much clearer definition of wages to a national floor wage, equal pay rules, and much stronger enforcement. With this knowledge, you're now way more empowered to look at your own payslip and understand your rights. So the question is, what will you look for?